Hello and welcome back to the Best for Baby podcast. I'm Lisa Rogers Sargent, your host, and it's a great pleasure to have you back if you've listened before. If you're new, I'm a paediatric physiotherapist, and we are currently doing a mini-series entitled The Baby Basics, What No One Tells You. And it's all the things I wish I could tell all parents before they had their babies, rather than coming into their homes and then having to help them or reassure them, support them, treat their babies. Today, if this is your first episode, please do go back and listen to the other one so you can get more of an understanding of who I am as a physiotherapist and my experience. But today is more a personal episode and very much about my journey as a mum. And we are talking about something that could be a little bit emotional, but it's really important, I think, to increase awareness about it. And that is prenatal and postnatal anxiety and depression. Now, I know you might say, oh, everyone talks about that, or I've heard it all before. But today's episode is going to tell you a little bit about prenatal, because I don't think many people talk about that. And it's certainly not something that I was aware of before I had it. And I'm also going to be talking about postnatal anxiety and depression, the things that people don't tell you that would be really helpful to know should you go through it. So to start, I just want to make clear when I'm talking about anxiety that all new parents have anxiety, all pregnant women have anxiety and concerns about usually their baby's health, or perhaps what kind of a parent they're going to be, or are their finances going to be enough, or are they going to have, is work going to be a problem, all these kinds of things. And these are your general mild worries that all parents have. And it's important to make the distinction. While those still need to be addressed and not kind of just brushed under the carpet, today I'm really focusing on true anxiety, which in order to get that distinction is where it is persistent and nothing alleviates those worries, or sometimes it's just that feeling of constant fear of the unknown, and is usually associated with physical symptoms, the sweaty palms, the racing heart rate, the racing thoughts, that uncomfortable fight or flight feeling. If that is persisting over time, then it's more likely to be prenatal or postnatal anxiety as a condition, rather than those general mild worries that most parents have. The other thing is that those worries are disproportionate to the likelihood of them coming true, or the situation that is causing the worry and the fear. So it's being overly concerned about something that most people wouldn't be overly upset by or overly concerned about. So it's that disproportionate response to an event or a situation. And then the other big thing is that it actually impairs your function, your daily life. So a lot of times women with postnatal or prenatal anxiety, their sleep is massively affected. So they have insomnia. It also means that during the day, they can't function as well as they usually do. They can't go about their daily tasks. Their relationships are affected. So when your worries are actually impacting on your life, and obviously it's the worries that are causing extreme distress to the woman who, and I keep saying woman, I mean lots of parents go through anxiety, but I'm talking about the person who has had a pregnancy and given birth. And so it's a result of those hormonal changes happening. So that's what we're talking about today. So to start with, I'd like to share my story with you, and we'll go through it kind of from the prenatal to the postnatal phase. And then I'll go back and just highlight my key areas that I'd like you to learn from, the key takeaway points, and then a few little hints and tips that may help you along the way. So if you don't already know, if you haven't listened before, I was 41 years old when I had my baby. And so I was older and there were some concerns there. Now, trying to put it into context, I had always been quite an anxious child, certainly an anxious young woman. And I think at my age, I had already started with perimenopause. And we all know what happens to our anxiety. People who are already anxious, when they go into perimenopause, that gets a lot worse. So I had certainly had a ramp up in terms of anxiety symptoms before I got pregnant. And then probably midway through the pregnancy, I started to get these thoughts that just kept coming, and they always were around the health and well-being of the baby. And I remember it starting in the night, and of course, everyone says, well, you don't sleep well when you're pregnant anyway, and certainly when you start to get quite big, it affects your sleep even more. And so you think, oh, well, this is all part of being pregnant. And I would start waking up in the night or lying awake for a long time, and then suddenly a very mild panic attack would start. And they never fully escalated because I was lucky enough to have my husband with me, and I'd wake him and he would help me through it. So they never got into a full-blown or a very severe panic attack, but they were mild panic attacks. Sometimes I would just cry and cry hysterically, and it was always fear for the baby's health. And I don't want to give you fears, so I'm not going to talk about them specifically, but things that could happen to a baby or a young child, things that would be out of my control. Sometimes my husband would say, but if we do X, Y, and Z, we can minimize those risks and those things happening to our child. And, but it was never what a trained counselor or professional would be able to do. He was just being a kind, helpful person and help me to get through them. So I would get through them in the night, but they would happen again because I wasn't treated, it wasn't diagnosed. And as I say, a lot of those things, just people go, oh, I'm not sleeping, and then I'm lying awake, and then my brain starts going like it does with anybody who lies awake at night. And so we didn't really put emphasis on the fact that there was something not quite right. This was disproportionate to the actual risk of these things ever taking place. This all culminated when I was quite late in my pregnancy, and one day I was driving. Now, I'm going to call it a new car because it was new for us, but it was a second-hand car. It certainly wasn't fancy, but it hadn't been scratched or damaged. And for me, I was quite an anxious driver because although I'd had a driver's license for a really long time, I hadn't had a car to drive. And so getting used to driving, also being pregnant and then starting to drive, can be a bit of a worry. But for me, it was a disproportionate worry. And one day I was driving in a shopping center and I was coming out of a parking lot, and it was one of those spiral ramps that you have to come down. And I got the car stuck and I couldn't go forwards and I couldn't go backwards. And obviously pretty quickly there was a queue of cars behind me, some people being kind and understanding, some people hooting and getting mad. And I had a completely disproportionate response to the situation. But I had a full-blown panic attack and I was on my own. If this happens to you, you'll know. You feel it. I don't have to describe it to you. But what I want to say is it was the equivalent of me being in an attack situation. That's how I felt. I completely had a full fight or flight response, and I couldn't get out of the car and flee. I couldn't fight with anyone. I couldn't use off or blow off that adrenaline. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make rational choices. My heart was pounding. I was sweating. I didn't know what to do. And to be clear, I do not compare my situation or this encounter with someone who is under attack or people who are living in truly traumatic situations. What I'm explaining is that this prenatal anxiety was so severe that it gave me the same response as someone in a far worse situation may experience. And I couldn't rationalize, I couldn't switch it off, I couldn't do anything. I certainly couldn't drive. So I just was going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. I mean, it's really embarrassing to tell the story now. But eventually, I somehow managed to get out. I don't remember driving home. It was massively traumatic and I couldn't cope with it. And for a long time, I perseverated on it and I would think about it and I would fear driving. And it was a major, major fear that got rooted in me. Obviously, after having the baby, that fear was surpassed by other fears, which we'll get into now. But it still persisted, and the whole point of getting the car when we had a baby was that I could meet up with people and do things. And I then had a baby during the pandemic, which meant I was really scared of taking my baby on public transport, so I had to drive, and often I would just not go out and not go to events where I needed to drive to them because I was so nervous of driving. So that was a massive impairment on my daily life that my anxiety was causing. From that, we sort of bumbled through it because, we didn't know any better. During my pregnancy, it was identified I was quite anxious. But at that stage, it was the start of the pandemic, and I was 41 years old. And the nature of my work is that I'd worked with children with additional needs. And so it was sort of explainable in my head that I was feeling a bit anxious. But nobody ever said to me, you have prenatal anxiety. So with all my anxieties on board, I had some very thorough discussions with my midwifery team and with the consultant obstetricians, and it was agreed that I would have an elective cesarean. Now, I know I may come under a lot of judgment for that, and I hope you will withhold your judgment on that one, because I knew it was the right thing for me as a very, very anxious person, not knowing that all that anxiety was actually prenatal anxiety that could have been treated. But it seemed like the right thing to do, and we went ahead and had an elective cesarean section. And that was in the NHS, so I didn't go off and pay for it. It was agreed that it was the correct thing for me. And yet again, nobody told me this term, prenatal anxiety. So even if they agreed I had it, and therefore agreed on giving me a cesarean section in the NHS, nobody ever said that word to me. Again, everyone was aware that I was anxious when I was in the hospital without saying these words to me, because they kept me at the hospital for 3 days after having it, or 3 nights, 4 days. And they kept me there to establish feeding, to make sure I was feeding well, and really to keep an eye on me. I was also immediately put into the extra support mental health. I can't remember what it is in the NHS, but it was for new mums who get increased midwifery visits, just to make sure they're okay and they're coping. Not because there were concerns about my baby, it was all because me. So there were all these red flags everyone was aware of, and still I didn't really clock it as a thing. And certainly when the postnatal anxiety and depression hit, I still didn't really clock it or think it was a thing. Whereas all those red flags, someone should have sat with me, or ideally someone would have said to me, it's very likely that you're going to have postnatal depression. It's kind of spiraling in this way. We've got all of this in place for you because you're so high risk, but you may need more help. Instead, I had increased visits, as I say, from the midwives, which was amazing. And because it was during the pandemic, I think there were a lot of visits being missed, along the way. Mine never got missed, and I got help. But they never really spoke to me about my mental health. They were just increased checks on the baby, which I think was very helpful for me because all of my anxieties were surrounding my baby. So a lot of the time I could go, okay, everything's going well. Okay, she thinks everything's fine. Okay, it's all good. Unfortunately, what happened is I lost all reliance on my own intuition as a mother. And I also lost reliance on my own knowledge as a clinician, as a paediatric physiotherapist. I couldn't rely on my own judgment. I suddenly decided someone else needed to tell me if things were going to be okay or not for everything. And I think that's not because of the increased visits. I think it's because of that anxiety that just robbed me of my logical brain. Because what we know happens, we've got the logical brain and the emotional brain. And when the one is active and on the go, the other is silenced. And my emotional brain was so active. My logical brain just was squashed. And I've done a number of other episodes where I mention my inability to make good decisions for my baby and for myself in those early days. And it was because my logical brain was just being switched off, and I was running on emotion and a lack of sleep, of course. So from there, we were in the early days in my home, and I developed a number of different anxieties about my baby. I don't want to list them because I don't want to put seeds of fear into your minds about your babies. But as a pediatric physiotherapist, I've seen little signs and little things with babies over the years that can be concerning. And normally, my logical brain is switched on and working really well when I'm helping another mother. And I reason through it with her and get to a point where I know if this warrants a further referral, or if maybe we just need to watch it for a little bit more time. But I would see things and I was convinced my baby had quite a serious condition. And this carried on and on. So for the first 4 weeks of life, I was in this state of being convinced she had a specific condition. And I had so many anxious moments. My husband wasn't really taking me seriously. He didn't think that this baby could have this condition that I was now going on and on about, which I guess made me try and prove to him why she definitely had it. Anyway, on top of all of this, as I have said before in another podcast, I wasn't feeding her regularly enough. And she was very sleepy and she had jaundice. So the jaundice was mild. She didn't need treatment for it. But actually, if I just fed her more regularly, it probably would have resolved much, much sooner. But at the 4-week mark, she still had jaundice. So I had an appointment to see a pediatrician. So we went there. But just before the appointment, a few days before, my very good friend had gently said to me she thought I should be feeding the baby more regularly, and I did, and within a few days the jaundice had cleared. And then we had the pediatrician appointment. So I went and I said to the pediatrician, jaundice is gone, but this other concern, please can we talk about that now? And this wonderful, fantastic pediatrician at Kingston Hospital did the neurological checks that I couldn't do logically and clearly. And so she got to the end of the assessment. She said, look, they're all very inconclusive. Normally we wouldn't be too worried, we'd leave her, but you are now here and I can see you really worried about it. And I'd obviously sold my case to her and half convinced her of it. And so we were admitted. And then we spent about 24 hours in hospital, and she had blood tests done, she had a brain ultrasound scan, and she had a brain EEG. So these are non-invasive. Well, the blood tests are obviously horrible, but there's not radiation and that sort of thing. But they did these tests on my daughter, and it was a very scary, horrible time. But the reason why I tell the story is because we went to have the brain ultrasound scan, and the woman who did it, she was about retirement age, and they just put the ultrasound scanner on the fontanelle here, and they can see the structure of the brain through the fontanelle. And she just looked at me and she said to me, all will be well, all will be well. And I kind of looked at her, and she was just so calm and so loving in her approach. I thought, what if I just believed her? What if I just chose to believe her and she was right? So I said, okay. And she then did the scan, and she said to me, all I can see is the structure of the brain. I can't see how the brain is functioning, but everything that should be there is there. And you've got the blood tests, and the results for the EEG will come back. And I need you to promise me that if those are all clear, you will take that as there is more evidence that all is well than there is evidence that there is something wrong. Promise me you'll do that. And I just looked at her, and nobody had approached me or spoken to me in this way since having a baby. And I just said, okay, okay. And she said, once you get that evidence that all is well, you're going to believe all is well. And then she said something, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was basically like this baby was going to teach me how not to worry so much, not to be so anxious. Anyway, I then went off, and obviously we got the results that were clear. And very often when you have anxiety like this, you have these absolute dips where you are so down in the dumps. It is so bad. You are so affected by it. And then something like this will happen. You take action that forces you to go and have all these tests. And then you get this amazing confirmation that all actually is well. And so you're on a bit of a high, and you can... you feel really good for a short moment before your next anxiety comes flooding in and sends you off in a different direction. But in that moment of having that confirmation that all was well, and this lady's voice like an angel in my head, I just made a decision to always remember from now on, when I start worrying about something about my baby, I'm going to gather evidence. It is all fine, or that there is something significant going on. So that was from about 4 weeks. I then had postnatal anxiety and depression up to 6 months. So it was a really tricky time. I wasn't sleeping, and that wasn't because of my baby. My baby slept through the night from about 4 weeks on. My husband, I was expressing breast milk, and he would feed her in the night, and I would be able to sleep for the full night. However, my baby would be fast asleep, my husband would be fast asleep, and I'd be wide awake staring at the ceiling with these terrible thoughts of things that could go wrong, things that might happen to my child one day, all these terrible, terrible thoughts in my head keeping me awake every night. And that certainly didn't help the fact that my emotional brain was in charge of me and my logical brain was silent. And my husband managed to get me referred to the talking therapies at Kingston Hospital. And because you're a new mum, they prioritize you. And very quickly, I was having weekly CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, with a therapist. And she was amazing, wonderful, wonderful Claire, shout out to her. And she gave me loads of strategies. So slowly, we switched on my logical brain, and that helped a bit. But the insomnia was really bad. And I had the depression. And so all these strategies, as helpful as they were, they couldn't fix my situation. And I remember my daughter was 6 months, just waking up and crying and saying to my husband, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. And my session with her for the week happened to be that very day. And in the session, she just looked at me and said to me, you have postnatal depression. You have it quite badly, I think. We now need you to see a GP. And at that stage, I had built up a real negative feelings about taking medication. I didn't want to be on antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs. And she talked me through them and she normalized them for me just in that discussion. That's what we spent the session on, talking about therapy options, because she knew I now needed more help. And so I was diagnosed properly. And then I started a course of sertraline. I had an amazing psychiatrist who went through it all with me, and he indicated that, some drugs you can take through pregnancy, which would have been amazing for me, and other drugs you can take whilst breastfeeding. Now, I was breastfeeding still at that stage, but he said to me, all your anxieties are around your baby and your baby's health, and I know that if I give you a drug and you think it's affecting your baby, this drug is not going to work. So he advised me, and I can't remember the specifics, and I would again, if this is your case, get you to discuss it with your psychiatrist and create a plan for you. It was a lot easier because my baby was already 6 months, so we had quite a good feeding schedule. And so what I could do was feed her first thing in the morning from one side and pump express milk from the other side, then feed her the express milk through the day. At that stage, I think I did start to supplement it with formula because it's hard to generate enough milk. And then at night, I would feed her again and express more milk. And this way, because sertraline, which is the anti-anxiety, antidepressant I took, it works through your body very quickly. And he said, by this time, it won't be passing into your breast milk. And I felt really good about that. So yeah, just while we're talking about drugs, just to say, people can put them into perspective for you. If it is the right thing for you, they can be really helpful, and you can find ways to have them that are safe whilst you are breastfeeding or even pregnant. Obviously that changed everything from once I started medication. And there was also a book that my husband bought me, and I'll put the link in the show notes. I think that might be it up there on my bookshelf. It's called Mind Over Mother by Anna Meher. And I read it at that time, so I can't remember a lot of it. But the one thing she talked about was intrusive thoughts that really stuck with me. And I'd never heard that term before. But to just know there was such a thing as an intrusive thought that everybody gets, not just me, not just people with anxiety and depression. It's a thought that pops into your head out of nowhere, and it's a scary thought, like mine was about I'm going to fall down the stairs while I'm carrying my baby and she's going to have a terrible head injury, or my husband's going to fall while walking down our stairs with our baby. And what she said in her book was to identify it and say, oh, you're an intrusive thought, you don't belong here, and out you go. she also spoke about visualizing yourself when you're 90 and talking to your baby who's now grown up, that sort of thing, which I couldn't quite get right. But at that stage, Netflix would come up and pop up Mamma Mia, and it was always the picture of Meryl Streep with Amanda Seyfried seated on her lap before the wedding. And I would go, that's going to be us one day. That's going to be me and my daughter one day before her wedding. And she's perfectly well and perfectly healthy. And so what I did was I took those two things. I would go, oh, you're an intrusive thought. You're not welcome in my head. And I think now I know through CBT, we are getting the logic, we're switching on the logical brain. So we shush the emotional brain by doing that, by going, I know what you are. And then I would replace it with, and at that stage, I couldn't do the big visualization. So I would just think of the Mamma Mia picture of Meryl Streep and her daughter before the wedding. And then I'd go, that's us. That's going to be us. And I could switch off those thoughts, which without the medication, I don't think I would have been able to do. My anxiety and depression was too far gone. But what I want to say that I didn't put in earlier with the depression is that I didn't recognize it. I thought I couldn't possibly be depressed because I was still happy. I had moments when I was happy. When I was with my daughter, I was happy. When I was looking after her, I was fine. It was when she was asleep and I wasn't physically doing something with her or for her that I would feel that depression come on. And because, I was with her, doing things with her for most of the day, I just assumed I don't have depression. So I battled it for so much longer, even though I was aware I was a high risk of it, but not properly told, look, you've had prenatal anxiety, you're probably going to have it after you've had your baby. I still couldn't identify it. And it got to the point where the CBT therapist said to me, yours is really, really bad. You need treatment now. So that's my other thing, is just to be aware. Even when you're in it, it might feel like you don't have it, and you actually need to have discussed this with anybody who's significant in your life, who you trust, who's going to be with you once that baby comes along, that you can kind of have a plan where maybe they can observe that your fears are now disproportionate, that it's impacting on your life, that it's causing you distress, and perhaps it's time to get help. Even if it's not that bad, if it's not that bad and you're feeling a bit anxious, ask yourself, because you might be in a position where your logical brain is still switched on enough that you can go, oh, I don't think this is right. I need a little bit of help. And there is, as I said, there's the talking therapies that most NHS services can provide. And just to finish off and say, I haven't been on sertraline for a really long time. I learned a lot of strategies through CBT. I'm quite a different person now, and I don't feel like I have anxiety. I drive all over the show. I have learned so many strategies to help with my anxiety that it doesn't impact on my life anymore, and it doesn't cause me extreme distress anymore. That said, I still have moments, but now I've learned all my little tricks and tools through CBT to help me just get through those times where it starts to flare up. And just in saying that, one way that my CBT therapist actually helped me to activate my rational logical brain when my emotional one has taken over was so first I had to identify, oh, I'm starting to panic, I'm starting to get into a situation, which I can do now quite easily, because once you do this over and over and you practice it, that's how you get long-term healing and recovery from these things. And so I would identify that, and then I would go, right, now I need to switch on my logical brain. How do I do that? First, by asking yourself how to do that. You're asking yourself a logical question. But she always said to me, ask yourself, how do I get to the bathroom from where I am, wherever you are in your home? And you would say, I have to stand up out of my chair, and I think I need to turn left, I need to walk through this door, I need to walk across the landing, I need to open the bathroom door, and basically you picture how to get to the bathroom, or, something like that. And immediately that switched on my rational brain and helped me to just get through that emotional flare, that fight or flight, and calm that panic attack before it started. And it creates those coping neural pathways through your parasympathetic nervous system, through your brain, where you learn how to kind of switch them off before it starts. And it's life-changing, really. I've got so many people who helped me along the way to thank. So this is a story of hope, but it's also a story of building awareness for you. So my learning points I want you to know is, firstly, that there is such a thing as prenatal anxiety and depression. And if you can identify it, you can treat it. And it's not just your normal, general mild worries that lots of parents have. It's things that cause you extreme distress and impact on your life. The second thing is that if your depression, your anxiety progresses, you may not recognize that you have it. You may think, I have moments where I'm super happy, or not just super happy, because then you might go, oh, I'm having bipolar episodes. Just that like calm, happy, normal, fine. And you can have that when you are depressed. You can, absolutely can. It's when your depressed moments are gathering steam, getting more and more, and they are impacting on your life, particularly if you're having insomnia. The third point is gather the evidence and focus on that evidence that proves that all is well. And if you can do that, if you can start counting the bits of evidence that are proving that maybe this isn't as big a concern as what you think it is, that's really helpful. If you can mount enough evidence that it could actually be fine, you might have a fair amount of evidence that there could be something really there that you should be worrying about, that you should take further action on. But if they're quite similar, or the one is you've got quite a lot of evidence, then at least say to yourself, I can't deal with this now. I'm not going to deal with this now. I'm going to put it aside and wait. And tomorrow, I'm going to reevaluate the evidence. If the evidence for there being something negative is getting higher, then I'm actually going to do something about it. And even if you're just crazy worried and there's not that much evidence that you could be wrong, do something about it anyway. Have an appointment with a GP, have an appointment with your midwife, because they can do what is necessary to reassure you and to show you that actually all is well, and give you the evidence that you need to confirm that all is well, to move on. And I think if we start focusing on those all is well moments, it helps us to do it in the next anxiety that comes along, to just learn to stack up the evidence that all is well, that I'm being anxious here. Obviously, if something is growing, then you would seek help because you have to, but also because a lot of the time it will rule it out for you. My other important information is to remember to recognize intrusive thoughts, horrible things that could happen, and the likelihood is probably quite small. And to go, I know what you are, you're an intrusive thought, out you go. If you can replace it with a happy thought, a happy visualization, your Mamma Mia moment, do it, because it's really helpful. If it is an intrusive thought of something that, the likelihood is a little bit higher that it could happen, then take measures. Take action to make sure that your fear doesn't come true, whatever it might be. Me, I had to just always say, I will never run down the stairs. I will never rush down the stairs with my baby, and have a conversation to make sure my husband also knew to be very careful going up and down the stairs, and then always to go, now you're just an intrusive thought, and replace it with my Meryl Streep picture. And again, a really helpful thing is to talk this through with a significant person, so that when your emotional brain is switched on and you cannot make those logical decisions, you cannot recognize if perhaps you are needing more help, that you have highlighted them towards it, or maybe even had like a safe word that they can say, which you will therefore agree that maybe you need more help, and so you can get it. Because there's a wide amount of help out there, as I said, and all of my help was free. It was on the healthcare service here. There are online resources, and there's always a way to get help. But just start by reaching out to someone in your inner circle that you have already on board. So with that, I also want to say I am going to be creating a freebie, a downloadable PDF that you'll be able to find on my website. Once it's done, I'll come back to this episode and pop it in the show notes. It's going to be like a 7-day reset, where you each day have a little task or activity as well as a tip for you. Some of it will be about the real common things, questions and concerns that parents have voiced to me over the years, and other things will be grounding, calming little tips like we've briefly touched on, that are all within my field of expertise, rather than the expertise of a psychiatrist or a counselor. So please do have a look out for that and download it and take it step by step. If it takes you 21 days to do the 7 days, that's totally fine. I just hope it will help you to have a really productive moment of calm where your logical brain is in place, and you will get to a point where you are calm enough to be able to reach out and get the correct help you need, or it will help you to deal with it and get through it. And so I hope that this will do that for you. And if you've just got a few normal mum worries, well, please download it anyway. It's a free resource and it's going to be quick and easy to do. And hopefully it'll bring you a lot of peace and reassurance about your beautiful, lovely baby on the way or new baby that you have. So I really send you all my best wishes and love and sympathies and understanding if you have been feeling a little bit anxious. So with that, I wish you all the very best. And as always, all the best for your baby.